Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. We're very, very excited to have you today. We've got a great webinar planned for you. We've got a webinar about moving from solo admin to center of excellence. Really great content today, and I am super excited because we've got an expert guest speaker with us. This is our first, I think, transatlantic webinar. We've got Jodi joining us from the UK. She's a technical delivery manager at Accenture. I am Jillian Medill, actually Jillian Bruce now, new last name. I'm an admin evangelist here at Salesforce. Really excited to help bring this content to you today, but Jodi is the one who is the customer expert. So before we get into any presentation here at Salesforce, we have to go through our forward-looking statement. All this is a reminder that you should only make purchasing decisions based on currently available features and functionality. Should not be a problem today because we are not actually talking about a lot of products. We also want to remind you to connect with us on social. So we're really glad that you're with us right now via the webinar. The webinar is being recorded. Let me repeat that. The webinar is being recorded. We get a lot of questions about that. And that recording will be available shortly after the webinar. It'll be available on our admin webinar group. But we also remind you to connect with us via Twitter at Salesforce Admins, no I, and #AwesomeAdmin. You'll see lots of great conversations happening there. We're also on Facebook and YouTube, where you can find all of our past webinars as well. We mentioned our admin webinar group. That is where we are hosting all the discussion happening about this webinar, about this topic, and all of our webinars. You can use bit.ly/admin webinar group. Now, capital letters do matter, so make sure you type those in correctly. And it'll take you right into our success community group, where we have experts standing by to help answer your questions. Don't wait until the end of this webinar to ask questions. Go ahead and get in there and ask some questions. There's also lots of other customer experts that are watching that can help answer any questions that you have. At the end, we will have a few minutes for Q&A. And today's agenda, we are going to do a short introduction about some of the terms we're talking about, like Center of Excellence and Solo Admin. Then we're going to get into quantifying and qualifying your work, planning and executing your Center of Excellence, and finally some resources and a Q&A. So let's get into it. What is a Center of Excellence, or a COE? A lot of us hear these terms all the time, so what exactly do they mean? So a Center of Excellence is really a place or a group of people who really promote collaboration and best practices to ensure great business results across your organization. The COE really focuses on key project goals in the context of the overall business. And so as a result, you can try new ideas more quickly instead of forcing them through an old IT channel that is more focused on keeping existing processes running. A COE also reviews user feedback and comments from user communities and response to enhancement requests. And the COE defines and shares best practices. That enables business units to really find it easier to comply with governance practices. And in many industries, data, security, visibility, and access are really critical to meeting regulatory requirements. And as a COE develops and communicates the roadmap for change, it really helps increase the velocity across the organization because everybody understands the priority of the business requirements. We're going to get more into details of what this actually looks like, but wanted to start off with giving you that definition. So we talked about Center of Excellence. The next thing we're going to talk about is what it means to be a solo admin. I'm sure we have many solo admins on the webinar joining us today. And solo admin really is, an admin is only one of your many, many jobs, right? You probably, maybe you're a sales manager, or maybe you are, you have another actual role. Your title is not actually Salesforce admin. So it's one of the many things you have to do in your day-to-day basis. But just being a Salesforce admin by yourself for an organization is a lot of work. Not only are you training new users, onboarding new users, but you're also in charge of managing the support for your production instance. You are the help desk for your organization. You're trying to manage new initiatives. You are the Salesforce expert. And your business really looks to you to be a business analyst to figure out how to use Salesforce best for your company. So solo admins are the master multitaskers and really the wearer of many, many hats. And I think we have a favorite slide feature on this. Toya Gatewood is our featured solo admin on this slide, and little Birdie told us that this was one of her favorite slides, right, Jodi?
Yes, she definitely thought that the whole spinning plates, wearing many hats was the right analogy for being a solo admin.
So Jodi, why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience as a solo admin and where you are at?
So what started this whole journey for me is I was managing an org by myself with about 450 users. Wasn't too complex, but had 2 apps, a few different business lines. There was a lot of things going on. I was working a lot of hours. I took on training. I took on a lot of the different components of a solo admin, like we saw on the last slide. But what really put me at a point of where I needed to do something was there was a new initiative coming our way where we were going to more than double our user base, going from 450 to 1,200 users, adding additional business units, doing now sales planning inside of Salesforce, having territory management. We were going to be doing all these additional things. And when I had initially gone to my management for additional support, because I said, I'm working X amount of hours now, they didn't actually understand why doubling the user base and doing all these additional things required more than one of me. So what it was that I had to do was build that business case. I had to show why it was imperative for us to make sure that we had the right amount of people supporting Salesforce so that we didn't have frustrated users. Because when I took over the area initially, people's opportunity pipeline moves were sitting in queue at IT for months and months. So we didn't want to, after having fixed all that, we didn't want to end up in the same situation again. So it was imperative that I kind of put this business plan together to say, this is why, this is what happens. And with help of Salesforce and looking at some of the resource planning, what I did was I set out to quantify and qualify my time. So how I was going to get there is quantifying my work. So I can say 1,000 times a day, I'm doing, X number of this, I'm creating new users, I'm training people, I'm flying to different parts of the country, training people. But it was really difficult to actually put that in a way that said, it takes, 2 of me to actually do this job. So you want to be able to quantify your work. You also want to be able to qualify. So I mentioned training and flying to different locations, but you also have different business efforts, right? Once you implement Salesforce, hopefully it's not just going to stay the way you implemented it. You want to add on to it and keep current with releases. So you want to be able to qualify all the work that goes along with that. The next part of that is creating a plan. So how are you going to get there? So it's great that you now have some statistics, but what are you going to do with that plan? How are you going to then lastly execute on it? So it's really important to put all these pieces together. So in quantifying your work, what I had done is my management, like I said, they didn't actually understand the value that I was bringing. They were just like, oh, well, you're answering other questions. You're getting things done on a daily basis. But yeah, why would you need help? They didn't actually understand what it meant to take on additional users or different functionality. So especially if you have territory management and you're managing territories, especially if they're changing all the time, it was a big effort for us. And I will be very honest with you, it wasn't perfect day one, but this is what I'm trying to give you are some best practices to kind of get started, and then you can tweak and modify as you see fit. So so I love this topic of what do you do all day, because I got asked that question so many times. What do you do all day? So to answer that question in a really simple way, I started to monitor support intake. Now, this piece was a little bit difficult at first because what I had to do is the people that, kind of fly by your desk or just pick up the phone or send you a text or a chat or message or all these random ways of telling you, I need you to do something for me. You had to sort of get them through into one channel. So what I did is I opted to use cases, and I set up cases, and I had a special record type for support requests. So that way I could see I'm doing X number of new user setups, I'm doing, this many password resets, I'm, running reports for these people. I wanted to be able to put all that together. So having a number behind that really kind of started to paint that picture for me. Then I did a bit of a time and motion study. So setting up a new user took this many minutes, and then you can sort of put together how much time it takes to do all these things. So I'm capturing it in Salesforce, and now I'm able to measure it. So cases is one way you can do it. There are a couple others, which I'll step into in a minute, but you want to be able to at least get those quantifiable statistics together. So TaskFeed is another app that I highly recommend because not only can you have the Kanban board, you can separate it out between support efforts and projects. So if you're doing something much more complex, and then you can actually see the board and have your different ones. So TaskFeed is another app that I highly recommend. And I know in spring we have the Kanban anything. So, but TaskFeed is another app that I like because then you can sort of separate these things out. And here's like a quick little snapshot of that. So next you want to be able to qualify your time. These are the things that you do all day long and you can't really put a timing on them, right? So it could be training people, it could be just answering random questions, it could be sitting with people because they want to do something and you want to help them put that together, right? Some new initiatives, you want to track maybe a sales contest in Salesforce. How do we do all these things? So what I then said is I'm going to put two buckets together. What are the things that I feel like I really can add value and what are things that are overhead? And I'll be completely honest with you, the value add are the things that I like to do and I wanted to continue doing. The overhead things were situations that were easily repeatable. I could train somebody else up very quickly. So I put those in the overhead bucket. So in the value add was these things where I felt like my Salesforce knowledge really was important, right? In those business analysis situations, creating reports and the initiatives. So I kind of put these together so I can see, all right, if I were to keep these value add things and then move these into the overhead bucket, how can I take care of these in a way that's going to make it easier for me to focus on the things that I do best? So that was what I mean by qualifying your time, really kind of isolating what it is that you do and then figuring out where you can add the most value. So next, you want to talk about planning and executing your COE. Now, before we really go into planning and executing, all those things that I said sound really, really easy. And for us sitting on the admin side, they are easy, right? You just set up a way of kind of quantifying the listings. But there's also a change management component in there. So if you already have people that are in Salesforce today, they're not going to probably naturally want to log a case or to do something specific to try to get something done. They're going to want to still call you. So, you know, there's definitely things you can do, whether it's web the case, email the case, but you want to make sure that you're socializing that change and showing people that this is the right way to do things, not just because you're trying to measure it, but because you want to be able to make sure that they can see where the progress is. So that also puts some power in the hands of your users. So if I submit something, I want to be able to see like what the status is of that particular incident. So that was sort of a value prop to my users. You can always see exactly where we are, and then you can ask us questions. You can follow up with us if you think we're not moving fast enough. So I tried to give that a little bit of a value prop to our users because it was a big change, right? You couldn't just stop by my desk and just bug me. So the next piece is really creating that plan of scale for the future. So now that I know what I'm doing all day long, where I'm spending my time, and have a rough estimate of what that looks like, you also need to look at your landscape. Do you have big projects coming your way? So in my situation, I had a really big implementation. This was something that was an 18-month-long project. So I had plenty of time to put that roadmap together, but you need to be aware of the fact that you could have things that are, maybe Service Cloud. You just have Sales Cloud now, but now you're going to be implementing Service Cloud. You're taking on new users. You have a lot of things going on. But then don't forget, 3 times a year, you have regular Salesforce releases. So you have to also see who's going to be impacted by those. So it's not just the project work, it's the day-to-day. It's the day-to-day keeping the lights on, as well as working with any of the release enhancements. And then also, are these going to be affecting your users? So do you have new users being added? Do you have users being impacted? Have processes changed? You need to be aware of these as well, because as part of implementing change, you want to make sure that you're communicating to your users, you're socializing that change, and you're preparing them. Because one of the things that people really, really dislike is change. So you want to make sure you can kind of get ahead of that, which leads us into the last piece, right? Is how are these changes going to be implemented? What is that, how is the organization scaling to meet demand? How are we going to handle the administration, the support? What are we doing for the future? So that's a really big question. So when you're doubling your user base, you're adding a lot more functionality, you're adding new people. How is this all going to come together? That's a really big component of this. And one of the things, just kind of stepping back into the change management piece, one of the things that we did was we tried to make sure that we were open and transparent with communication. So we did a number of things like lunch and learns, we did different trainings, we had tools. I recorded some vignettes where they were just like 1 or 2 minute little like training snapshots that people could play that we had on our portal that would say, oh, this is how you do something. So we wanted to make sure people were adequately prepared for any of the small changes to the big changes that were coming our way. So now that you have your plan for the future, you want to make sure that you have the right people and the right amount of people to support what's happening. So whether it's that big implementation, it's just some smaller efforts, the number of people you have is completely doubled or tripled if you're fortunate. How do you resource for the future? So this handy little chart I actually got from my Salesforce AE, which is really helpful to me, right? So it's a guideline, like with anything else, because if you look over 750 users, it says depends on a variety of factors. So it was definitely a guideline for us, right? So we needed to have a certain number of business analysts because we had, territories being changed all the time. We had pipelines moving. We had a lot of different things happening. So we wanted to make sure that we could adequately prepare for all those things that were going to be happening. So we definitely use this for resourcing. The next piece, while you're looking at the resourcing component, is the fact that how are you going to resource? Not everybody always has the ability to add, additional staff. So there's a number of different ways you could do this, right? So maybe you get 1 or 2 additional people on site, but you can also perhaps extend your team. So I actually sat in the business, but I did enlist some of my IT people to help with some of the smaller things, maybe some data loads. Also, our help desk could help with some really basic questions. I've also worked with clients where we've shown them Premier support. So if they didn't have, they only had 1 admin, they could also offload to Premier support. The last option is really if you want to use consultants or managed service contracts. And I've done this with a number of our clients now where, we've done really big, complicated implementations. We've trained the people on site, but having managed service contracts where as an admin, you can triage any of the support questions, but then hand them off to somebody at the consultancy as well is another way of going about it. So it's not just that you have to add to your staff. There's a number of different ways that you can solve for the resourcing for the future. And sometimes when you're building that business case, having a variety of different ways to do this, specifically not just add to staff, will probably help you get that business case through a lot faster. So now when we pull it together with the whole Center of Excellence piece, we really want to make sure that we're defining that governance structure. So these are some of the key components that we really want to be aware of. And the governance is really just, making sure that we're effective and efficient. We're using the technology to enable our organization to achieve its goals. And I'm not going to spend too much time on defining the governance structure because Jillian did a great job of defining it, but we want to make sure that whatever we do, we know what we're trying to deliver, why it's important, and what the value is to the business. So now that we've put together a plan to have the right number of staff, we know what that roadmap looks like. How do we make sure that we're really doing all the right things? So we have a change management process to manage enhancements. So even if you have a big project coming your way, you're still going to have to keep the lights on. You're still going to have to do some of these smaller efforts. There's things all the time that crop up. So we want to make sure that we're still delivering on the promises that we make to our end users, and we're able to prioritize and utilize our resources effectively. And then release management. How often are we doing releases? And these are in addition to our 3 times a year releases with Salesforce, but are you doing more of the DevOps process where it's more agile? Or do you have monthly releases or every 2 weeks? What does your release management process look like, and what's your methodology? And then lastly, support. You want to make sure you're able to respond to your users. You don't want to just implement a bunch of new stuff and just, there you go. You want to make sure that they have the right level of training, that they're part of the communication channel. And one of the things that I really like to do is have like a set of change management experts, meaning I have change agents. Get these guys in on, on the initiatives, on the different things that are happening, so they will be your super users and they will shout about how great everything is to the rest of your users. So now when we tie it all together, we've created our plan by quantifying the amount of time you spend on different tasks. We are able to qualify and actually bucket out the value-added items, right? So we know the things that we absolutely need to do, and we know the things that we can offload to other people or other groups. So we know where we really need to spend our time. We've created that plan. We've looked at resourcing. We've looked at the variety of ways you can resource, and then figured out what is, even if it's the next 6 to 12 months, we figured out what that plan looks like, and you can, of course, always adjust for the future. And then we're executing on building that business case. So we've now put everything together. What I will tell you is that when I did this, it wasn't perfect from the get-go. The territory management piece and the amount of times that territories changed, we had absolutely no idea of how many times that was going to be. We had an estimate. We talked to sales managers. We were so backlogged with territory management changes, and things are changing all the time, especially when it came to sales planning and the end of the year. Things are constantly shifting and adjusting all of the time. So one of the things that I will definitely say is this is a great way to get started. But as you continue on, you may need to look again at your processes and how much do you have in your backlog? How many things are you really working on, all the time? So you may need to add the staff. You might have to bring in, that managed service contract in addition to your added staff, because sometimes you cannot anticipate some of the volume. So these are some of the things that I kind of got stuck on. So you could put all these things together really great, but there's always going to be variables that you're probably not able to control. So.
Well, Jodi, that was amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge and experience with us today. We have a bunch of resources to share with everyone on the webinar. This is some great stuff that you can do as a follow-up to learn more about a COE and building governance structures. There was a great Dreamforce session. In fact, there were a few, but this is one that is very, very closely tied to what we just talked about today, about building a center of excellence to manage complex business environments. We've also got a couple of great podcasts. Everybody loves the Button Click Admin podcast. About the Center of Excellence and governance structures as well. We've got one with Glenn Weinstein, and then another one about managing user permissions with Justice Sikakani. And of course, we've got some great Trailhead content. There's actually a specific part of a module that is focused on this exact topic. It's under the Change Management badge, and the module is Managing Change with Governance Framework Unit. So make sure you check that out. And we're going to go and look right now in the group and see if we've got any questions in our admin webinar. Again, just a reminder, this is where you should go and ask any questions. We have experts standing by. So let's see if we've got anything going on in there. Let's see. All right, Jodi, it looks like we've got a question. This is actually a great question about a Salesforce Accelerator. Jodi, do you know anything about the Salesforce Accelerator program to help build a COE?
I knew that there was one, but I haven't looked at it yet. So no I can definitely go and take a peek at that.
Yeah, it looks like this is a great question again. Shows you how big Salesforce is. I'm not really aware of it either, but it sounds like a great thing to go check out. We'll find a good link for it and post it in the group when we get some more information. Jodi, here's a really good question for you. Do you have any suggestions to help communicate with people who are resistant to change?
Yeah, that's actually a really, really great question. So those people that are resistant to change, sometimes those are the people that you can really bring around. It's really around making them understand what's in it for them. That's the biggest piece, right? It's like they want to know what that value proposition is for them, and they're really looking at that. So it's basically laying that out and making sure that they understand why they're doing it, because I think, especially if you work in a sales organization, it's always about Big Brother, and that's not it. It's not it at all. You're just trying to make sure that you're enabling their success and that they have what they need at their fingertips.
Great. Thanks for that information. Well, I definitely want to remind everyone to get in the webinar group and ask some more questions. How about another question for you, Jodi? How about any tips to gain buy-in from senior leadership and get executive sponsorship as you kind of build your center of excellence and make those asks and put those business value asks together?
That's actually a really great question, and that was the reason why I put all of this together, because when I first asked for the additional resources without any proof behind me, they just basically laughed at me. You're doing fine. Just work more hours. You could do this. So what is leadership like? Leadership likes to have a fully formed plan. They want to be able to see, like, the pros and cons, why you need to do this. Basically, what's the, for lack of a better term, what's the ROI? What am I going to get out of this? Well, you're going to be able to, and you just lay that out in your plan. You're going to be able to service, your end users. You're going to be able to make sure that they have everything they need at their fingertips. They're able to have what they need to sell to be more efficient, and you want to just lay out what those benefits are. Because the way you're going to get that buy-in is by showing what the benefits are, how you're going to get there, and what the cost of not doing it is going to be.
That's a great suggestion. Yeah, I think that's kind of what we're hoping that this webinar can help solve, right? Help get buy-in from senior leadership.
Exactly.
Again, we're definitely looking for questions. So if you have any questions, please post them in the admin webinar group. Here's a question for you, Jodi. Any advice for administering two separate orgs? How does that fit into kind of the structure that you presented today?
So two separate orgs, that's interesting. One of the things that we did, when I was actually, before I stepped into consulting, I was running a team where I had multiple orgs. So we measured each of the orgs separately, but then had like a full staff model where we pulled the stats in from each of the orgs. I'm sure there's other ways that you can do this, but what I wanted to do is keep my users in the org to log their cases. But you obviously could do it in just one org and maybe use like a web to case or some other, front end where you can do that. I just kept them separate in each of the orgs because I did have people who were specifically allocated to certain orgs, so I wanted to make sure I kept that distinction and kept it discreet.
Great advice. Okay, we got another good question for you. Any advice on getting your company to slow down to go through the new processes that you're rolling out?
Oh, that's a great question. Yes, I've seen that one before. What is it that they're trying to accomplish? So one of the things that I do a lot, and I think I probably do this more now in consulting, is what is the value out of what you're trying to do? What is your business driver? What are your processes, and what is the outcome you're trying to achieve? Is it just because you want to throw a bunch of stuff in the Salesforce? I mean, it's great. We love Salesforce. That's what we do, right? But what is it that you're trying to achieve? Because if you go so fast at rolling things out, you're going to lose people along the way, and they're going to give up, and they're not going to want to use it. So you want to take everybody on the journey. You want to make sure you're socializing change properly, and you want to actually understand why you're making the change. Is it just because it just seems like it'd be cooler in Salesforce? Probably, but why do you really want to do it? And I ask this question a lot, is this the best place to put something? And I've had clients where they just want to throw everything in Salesforce and even help desk processes. Let's throw it in Salesforce. That might be the right place. It might not. But let's look at this more in a methodical way. We probably will end up in the same place, but at least we have the right information while we're rolling out and socializing the change.
Great advice. Well, Jodi, thank you so much for sharing all of your great wisdom and expertise with us today on the webinar. Everyone, be sure to join our webinar group on Success Community. If you have any more questions, please post them. We'll be in there answering them for the next couple days and onwards. So the recording for this webinar will be posted within the next day or two, and as well as the deck. So thank you so much for joining us. And we look forward to having you join us on more admin webinars. Have a great day, everybody.